Hi, welcome to Listen2Riches. The book I want to talk about today is called Scarcity. The subtitle is Why Having Too Little Means So Much. In about 20 minutes, I will explain the essence of the book to help you understand how the scarcity mindset leads to poverty. The book has two authors. One is Sendhil Mullainathan, an economics professor at Harvard University. The other is Eldar Shafir, a psychology professor at Princeton University. Through their extensive research and experience in poverty alleviation, the authors discovered a phenomenon: the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. We used to think that this wealth gap was caused by external factors such as the ability of the wealthy to invest surplus money, provide better education for their children, and access different opportunities, perspectives, and resources. In other words, external factors led to the poor becoming poorer and the rich becoming richer. However, the authors propose another perspective. They believe that people who are trapped in long-term poverty tend to remain poor even if they receive financial support. This is because their mindset and decision-making lead to bankruptcy, thus perpetuating their poverty. It's important to note that poverty here is not just material deprivation but also includes a lack of time, knowledge, and skills. Some people not only lack funds but also lack strong social connections, leading to a scarcity of resources, which is also considered a form of poverty. The authors found that long-term poverty leads to a scarcity mindset, and this mindset is the fundamental reason for deepening poverty. Therefore, understanding the scarcity mindset is crucial to escaping poverty. So, what is scarcity? What are its harms? Next, we will explore three aspects: the composition of the scarcity mindset, the potential harms it can bring, and methods to prevent the emergence of a scarcity mindset. First, let's focus on the first aspect: what exactly is scarcity? The scarcity mentioned here is not about objective material shortages, but rather an internal scarcity mindset. It's similar to the feeling of urgency when a task is approaching its deadline. For instance, if you have a work task to complete every Friday, but you haven't finished it by Thursday, you'll feel a sense of urgency. You'll devote your full attention to the task, and almost nothing can distract you. This is because completing the task has become critically important and everything else can be put on hold. You enter a state of intense focus, which is the scarcity state. After hearing this example, you might think that the scarcity state isn't necessarily a bad thing because it can help us complete tasks more efficiently. Indeed, it can yield the benefit of focus. Focus, in this context, means concentrating your attention for a short period, resulting in high productivity. In a state of focus, you can unleash the potential of your remaining resources. For example, when a deadline is looming, you'll experience a continuous sense of urgency and typically complete the work in the final stages. Another example is that the last few pieces of chocolate in a box always seem the most delicious. Also, during the last few days of a vacation, we cherish the time even more. These are all the benefits of the scarcity state, which brings about focused returns. Although this short-term focus can have certain advantages, being stuck in a scarcity mindset for an extended period is far from ideal. It leads to a vicious cycle of resource scarcity that results in poverty. To understand this cycle, we first need to examine the consequences of scarcity. Generally, scarcity gives rise to four effects. The first aspect is the tunneling effect. Tunneling refers to looking through a pipe, like when you see things through a tube. At that moment, you can only see what's inside the pipe and you can't see what's outside of it. We often use this term to describe a person's short-sightedness and narrow perspective. When we face scarcity, we tend to focus our attention on the most immediate concerns. As a result, we often overlook the truly important things, the ones that can lift us out of poverty. The author introduces this with a vivid example using American firefighters. They often face emergencies. When the fire alarm goes off, firefighters need to get dressed, grab essentials, and quickly get on the fire truck within 60 seconds. You might think most firefighters might perish in the fire, but statistically, nearly 80% of accidents happen on the way to the fire. Some are due to accidents involving the fire truck and other vehicles. However, can you guess the leading cause of death? They didn't fasten their seat belts and were thrown out of the vehicle during sharp turns, resulting in fatalities. This might seem unbelievable. After all, firefighters undergo rigorous training, so why would they overlook something as simple as buckling up? This is the effect of tunneling. Imagine when they receive a fire alarm, they enter a state of scarcity of time. They must prepare within an extremely short time, strategize for firefighting en route, analyze the structure of the fire scene, calculate the water supply, and estimate the fire size. These tasks can cause important but seemingly ordinary things to be overlooked. The tunneling effect changes the way we make decisions. For instance, normally you might go for a run every morning. But when work gets hectic, you might think, well, running isn't that important, finishing work quickly is the top priority, skipping a run for a day or two won't hurt. In the long run, investing in your health is the most important, and you're well aware of this. In a state of scarcity, you might make decisions that undermine long-term value. Another example is a thought experiment. Right now, think of things that are white besides milk. You can ponder and see how many you can come up with. You might not think of more than 10 things. But there's a trick to make this experiment easier. Remove the introduction I gave earlier and directly ask you what things are white besides milk. Then you might think of moonlight, sea foam, ivory, and various others. But if I ask you what things are white besides milk, this qualifier, besides milk, will inhibit your thoughts. You can try this out. It's what psychologists often call inhibition. Overfocusing on something can inhibit competition. Just like when you're angry at someone, this inhibition will make you overlook all their usual good qualities and you'll become angrier the more you think. So scarcity leads to the tunneling effect, making us focus only on urgent matters within a narrow scope, and important things outside the tunnel are also overlooked and inhibited, keeping you in an ongoing state of urgency. The second aspect is that scarcity triggers the borrowing phenomenon, where individuals habitually overuse future resources. Let's take a credit card as an example. It's hugely popular nowadays. Perhaps you've used a credit card so you can relate to this phenomenon. A credit card seems like a bottomless pit. Once you overdraw once, cash is almost gone from your wallet. When you've just received your salary, before you can even use it, you have to use it to pay off debts, often putting you in a state of scarcity. If an emergency occurs during that month, such as a close friend's wedding where you need to prepare a significant red envelope, that month becomes tricky. The overdue interest on credit cards is usually extremely high, right? Another example is high-interest loans. The author noticed that the poorer people are, the more inclined they are to borrow at high interest rates, and once they borrow, bankruptcy is just around the corner. You might wonder, don't these people understand that this high-interest debt will plunge them into financial difficulties? Of course, they do, but compared to the urgent situation they face at the moment, those consequences are pushed into the future. This is often their attitude when borrowing. It's not just about money. Busy individuals often borrow in terms of time, like, if the work for this week isn't finished, it's pushed to the next week. Tasks for the next week are further postponed to the week after that. This constant procrastination leaves them in a state of scarcity all year round. This state causes people to completely overlook other ways to rescue themselves, such as time management, energy management, and improving work efficiency. Therefore, in the long run, borrowing leaves individuals even poorer. The third aspect is that scarcity leads to a lack of slack, meaning there's no extra time and space. Imagine you're going on a trip and you have a suitcase. You need to pack your essentials like toiletries, a few pieces of clothing, electronic devices, and small items. After packing, you might find that there's still some space left in the suitcase. So you can stuff some less important things in it, like magazines or snacks. The whole process is quick and pleasant. But if the suitcase is small, it's a different story. You start to weigh and compare, constantly thinking during packing whether to take a certain item, because soon you'll realize the suitcase is full. At this point, you might think, it looks like I've saved more space now. But you need to know how much energy and time this process consumed. Why do people feel life is so burdensome? The reason lies in the constant need to weigh every decision, even down to spending a single dollar or dedicating a moment of time. This way of thinking, while seemingly efficient, actually adds a significant psychological burden to individuals, consuming their attention and energy. This exacerbates the tunneling effect, causing you to prioritize immediate tasks while neglecting what's genuinely important. Therefore, unused slack time and space become particularly crucial. Here, I will share a story the author mentions in the book. There's a hospital that constantly grapples with a shortage of operating rooms. Despite having 32 operating rooms, they need to perform over 30,000 surgeries annually. The operating rooms are always fully booked, and they frequently have to deal with emergency surgeries. The doctor's biggest concern is these emergency surgeries because when they occur, it disrupts the scheduled surgeries. The hospital's doctors are always working hard for surgeries, and in reality, they are continuously making up for the unfinished surgeries from the previous week. Therefore, the entire hospital is perpetually in a state of scarcity and everyone is constantly running. You can imagine the doctors working long hours, but they are only human and can't work endlessly. First, their bodies can't handle it, and their work efficiency gradually declines, leading to a rising error rate. The hospital has to pay substantial compensation for surgical errors. So, how is this problem resolved? You might say, why not add more operating rooms? Theoretically, no matter how many operating rooms you add, the demand for surgeries will always exceed the resources. So, how should it be solved? They hired a consultant who, after understanding the situation, proposed a simple solution: reserve one operating room out of the 32 solely for handling emergency surgeries. The hospital's leadership wasn't entirely satisfied with this proposal. They thought that their resources were already insufficient and reserving one would be wasteful. However, the consultant didn't say much and just suggested they give it a try. The results proved that it was highly effective. Surgery acceptance rates increased by 5%, the number of surgeries scheduled after 3 p.m. dropped by nearly half, and the surgical error rate significantly decreased, producing immediate results. So, how did all of this work? It's what's called the benefits of slack. The consultant found that the hospital's surgeries could be divided into two types: planned surgeries and unplanned surgeries. Planned surgeries were already occupying all the operating rooms, so any unplanned surgeries would affect the entire surgical schedule. However, the hospital hadn't considered the cost of rescheduling. These costs include economic costs, such as doctors' overtime pay and medical expenses, efficiency costs, as doctors working overtime each day would extend surgery times and reduce efficiency, resulting in significant costs. After looking at these costs, you'll realize that the scarcity of operating rooms isn't due to a lack of space, but rather a lack of the ability to handle emergencies. The solution was to reserve an operating room for emergencies, ensuring that unscheduled surgeries wouldn't disrupt the regular schedule. Through this approach, all the mentioned costs were reduced, and the hospital could escape the state of scarcity and work more orderly. In fact, if you think about it, this state is very similar to the situation of heavily indebted poor people. Poor people have limited risk tolerance. As soon as there's any movement, they fall into a state of scarcity, such as using every month's income to pay off last month's debts. In the long run, the costs are enormous. In reality, many systems' normal operation requires some margin. Maybe you've seen early cassette tapes where there's always a blank section at the end to ensure the entire tape doesn't get pulled apart, prolonging its lifespan. Take washing machines as another example. If they're overloaded, they can't function properly, so some space needs to be reserved for smooth operation. On the road, if traffic congestion exceeds 85%, the likelihood of a traffic jam approaches 100%. As soon as the number of vehicles reaches a certain level, when one vehicle brakes, all following vehicles stop. So, any system needs to have some slack, which is not a waste of resources but a guarantee of more efficient system operation. From this perspective, the essence of scarcity is the absence of this margin. While leaving slack may lead to a slight decrease in individual efficiency, the positive benefits it brings are significant. It's a luxury mental indulgence that allows us to not weigh trivial matters and not get overly fixated on mistakes. This enjoyment is crucial for personal happiness. As Thoreau said, a person's wealth is directly proportional to the number of things they can let go of. The fourth and most important point is that scarcity leads to a deficit in bandwidth. So, what is bandwidth? Bandwidth refers to our collective cognitive, attention, decision-making, execution, and resistance to temptation capabilities. From managing daily tasks to solving problems, we need bandwidth, and you can think of this bandwidth as a highway with a certain width. There's a limit to the number of vehicles that can simultaneously travel on this road, typically accommodating 7 cars side by side. In other words, we can only focus on up to 7 things at most. If we exceed this number, it causes a bandwidth overload, the road gets congested, and the speed of all vehicles declines. At its worst, there can be accidents. You might ask, why just 7 things? Can't we handle 8? Well, you can, it's just a rough estimate. If you think about it, the number of mobile apps we frequently open on our phones is usually no more than 7, the number of contacts we regularly interact with isn't much higher, and the places we frequently visit also don't exceed 7. 7 is often considered the threshold that the human mind can bear. Beyond this number, a person experiences a severe bandwidth overload, leading to feelings of exhaustion and powerlessness. If we talk about entering a state of scarcity, this bandwidth shrinks even further. It's like the highway becoming narrower, as we mentioned earlier, entering a state of intense focus on just one urgent matter. One of the major reasons why poor people remain poor is a lack of bandwidth. They often overlook important matters. Let me give you an example. There are approximately 285 million people in the world with diabetes, and although diabetes is now generally treatable and non-lethal, why do many people still die from it every year? The reason is simple: these people don't take their medication on time. It's similar with various other conditions. Most of the time, it's the result of patients not adhering to their treatment schedules, and studies have found that a significant portion of those who don't adhere to their medication regimens are poor. The poorer people are, the less likely they are to adhere to their medication schedules. For example, farmers are well aware that weeding at the right time can significantly increase crop yields. However, farmers in impoverished areas around the world often neglect weeding, and you might wonder if these people are lazy. They are not. They are busy planting seeds, watering, and fertilizing, and often very occupied. Yet they are unwilling to do something as simple as weeding, which can greatly improve their income. Experimental results show that poor people have deficits in many aspects. For instance, poor people in the United States tend to be more overweight, are less likely to educate their children, avoid buying insurance, don't get vaccinated, don't save regularly, and don't invest. Do these people not know these things are important? If you ask them, they'll agree that these things are important, but they are not urgent, and they tend to focus only on urgent matters. These problems can all be explained using the concept of bandwidth. Poor people have narrower bandwidth, so their daily concerns consume most of it, leaving little room for focusing on long-term, important matters. They are constantly preoccupied with questions like, how can I save money? Should I buy this at a discount? My rent is due tomorrow and I don't have the money. What do I do? Their minds are occupied and they don't have the bandwidth to think about how to escape this predicament. A lack of cognitive bandwidth also leads to a decline in their decision-making ability. For instance, the author conducted an experiment where participants in one group were tested without any distractions, while those in the second group were induced to think about their economic situation, focusing on what they lacked. The results showed that the first group scored significantly higher, almost twice as much as the second group. This demonstrates that a lack of bandwidth affects intelligence. As mentioned earlier, this concept of bandwidth underpins a wide range of human behaviors. We use bandwidth to interpret facial expressions, control emotions and impulses, and think. When bandwidth is lacking, we enter a state of mental sluggishness. Imagine having a conversation with someone who's browsing the internet at the same time. You have no idea what they're busy with, and their lack of focus while talking makes you feel disconnected. What do you think? Wouldn't you feel like this person is cold, abnormal, and disrespectful? The author noticed this phenomenon when talking to many poor people. They have difficulty sleeping, even poor self-control, and are more likely to smoke and drink when they face challenges. This only worsens their troubles. Therefore, when poor people neglect taking their medications, fail to weed their fields, avoid buying insurance, don't save or invest, it's primarily because they don't prioritize these things. What poor people truly lack is not just time or money but cognitive bandwidth. They need to allocate some attention to focus on long-term planning, learn new skills, manage finances regularly, and break free from the scarcity trap. From the previous 4 points, we can clearly see how the scarcity trap is formed. For poor people, because they lack money, their attention becomes consumed by financial matters. Everything in their lives is related to money. The many concerns about money lead to insufficient bandwidth, making them prone to impulsive decisions and a loss of control. This, in turn, results in a decline in cognitive ability and the making of more wrong decisions, such as borrowing and overspending, which eventually traps them in an endless cycle of debt. As for time-poor individuals, because they lack time, they need to focus on too many things, causing a deficit in bandwidth. They are constantly preoccupied with urgent matters, making them always feel rushed. This leads to more erroneous decisions and, in the end, makes them perceive time as even scarcer, creating a vicious cycle. In simple terms, being too focused on something often limits your perspective, creating a vicious cycle that makes it harder to achieve your goals. This is why we often say that the more you obsess over making money, the less likely you are to succeed. Conversely, if you focus on serving others and addressing their needs, you are more likely to make money. For scarcity, it's just like saying that when a person is happy, they smile, and when they're angry, they lose their temper. Similarly, when scarcity is encountered, it inevitably leads to a series of vicious cycles. So, you might ask, how do you avoid entering such a state? The author offers 3 strategies: conserve bandwidth, leave some slack, and set reminders. Let's start with the first one, conserving bandwidth. How do you conserve bandwidth? It involves reducing the minor decisions you need to make in your daily life. For example, Mark Zuckerberg wears the same clothes every day to minimize decision-making hassles. It's better to have less of this trade-off thinking in life. At the very least, don't sweat the small stuff for a few dollars and don't waste a lot of time to save a few bucks. Don't always think about what you lack. Focus your attention on what truly matters, concentrate on things that can accumulate over the long term, and make efficient use of your bandwidth, which is an important method for breaking free from scarcity. The second strategy is to leave some slack. Even if you don't have much money, set aside a small portion for investing. You can save regularly or invest in learning to improve your skills and cognitive abilities. Try not to overdraw, try not to borrow, and don't constantly think about what you lack. Focus your attention on what truly matters, concentrate on things that can accumulate over the long term, and make efficient use of your bandwidth, which is an important method for breaking free from scarcity. Congratulations, you've completed another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to Listen2Riches, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice and achieve our financial goals. Create a better future. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next episode.